While Pathfinder 2e has become my system of choice for long-form fantasy TTRPG, I don't have a definitive best-in-class option for rules-lite or short-form games. I favor free-form universal for totally free-form, any genre pickup game, and I love Fate, but the core engine wasn't built to support mechanical tactics. I've tried Daggerheart and Nimble, both of which are good at what they do, but they're both just enough mechanically crunchy still to not qualify as rules-lite for me. I'd rather run Volition RPG than either of those games, especially if I want to run Theater of the Mind, and not least because some of my own design sensibilities have influenced Volition RPG since I happen to know the creator. I bring up this list because I want you to know that when I say I was blown away by Pathfinder Quest and its potential for running rules-lite TTRPGs, it's not because this is my first ever rules-lite game. Hey everyone, Utkarsh from Spiritbell Games here. The first question you might be asking is, what is Pathfinder Quest? Well, it's a tabletop game that went on Kickstarter last year from Paizo. And on the surface, it is meant to be a Gloomhaven type game in a Pathfinder setting, which is to say it's advertised as a 4-player co-op story-based board game with a pre-written adventure path, where the choices you make in one adventure or session go on to influence the outcome of future adventures, to the point where it might even select which missions you get to do. So this sits somewhere between pure board games and tabletop role-playing games. Now, I think of pure board games as experiences that don't have a story. They may have a theming, but not a story, and where every session is more or less self-contained, outside of some legacy games like Pandemic Legacy. Whereas Pathfinder Quest, it has a story, it has non-combat and combat encounters, it has choices like you would get in a CRPG and TTRPGs. But that being said, the pre-written adventure is just as much on rails as something like a CRPG like Dawnsbury Days. So is it really fair to compare Pathfinder Quest to other TTRPGs when ostensibly it's not even in the same category? Well, after playing the game, it is my strongly held opinion that Pathfinder Quest is a rules-lite, structure-heavy, zone-based, quick-start fantasy tactical cinematic TTRPG that comes with its own fully pre-written adventure. In this video, I'll break down those terms and make my case on why I think it has great potential for being run as a TTRPG. In the next video, I'll dive into the dice mechanics of the game, which are fascinating and touch upon other elements of the games, including many complaints that people have about PF2e. And finally, I'll wrap up with a third video that discusses a bunch of miscellaneous topics, including my personal positives and negatives of the game. If you are subscribed to my Patreon, then you can watch all 3 videos together in one video already. Okay, before I go on to defend Pathfinder Quest as a TTRPG and describe which TTRPG niche it fits, let me give a brief overview of its structure and how much of it I have played. So this past weekend, 4 of us played 4 PCs in GM-less mode, which is the base game. It took us 15 minutes of setup, including character creation, but not including all the time I spent looking up how to start up the totally optional Foreteller web app. That one's just on me, so it doesn't count. We played for 4 hours, not including meal times, and that allowed us to finish 2 adventures. And that does include time spent on the initial tutorial as we read the rules for the first time. The full adventure path seems to consist of 8 adventures total. Within the 2 adventures that we played, we, as best as I could count, did 8 combat encounters and 10 non-combat encounters. Non-combat encounters had a fair bit of variance, but a lot of them, the most common version, was to explore a scene with multiple points of interest that the PCs could investigate. So a scene with multiple points of interest still counts as only one encounter here. So on average, per adventure, that was 4 combat encounters, 5 non-combat encounters, done in about 2 hours. Many of the non-combat interactions yielded items as rewards, and these scenes became the primary source of items, with level ups being a secondary, less frequent source. There is no shopping for equipment, and there's no crafting. And there's no wealth. The adventure facilitates roleplay in 2 main ways. It has a counter similar to a clock in Blades in the Dark that counts down time. And the more time you spend doing non-combat activities in a non-combat scene, the more time ticks down. And the second way was by providing clear and distinct forks in the story, optional combat objectives or clear choices in non-combat scenarios, which changed later on something in a future encounter. Now, in common TTRPG parlance, role-playing has come to mean speaking in the voice and speaking as the character in first person. In the group that we were playing, one player was not comfortable with that aspect of the game, who hadn't played TTRPGs before, so we skipped a lot of in-character dialogue, which no doubt sped up the session. So that's the summary of what we played, and I'll leave my thoughts later for what I thought of the game. For now, let me just go in to characterize the game. I have called Pathfinder Quest a rules-light, structure-heavy, zone-based, quick-start, fantasy, tactical, cinematic TTRPG, and I will break down those terms here. And I will also make sure to differentiate it from Drawsteel, because the advertising of Drawsteel uses similar terms, but in actual play, they're both giving different weights and different characterizations to different terms. So I will make sure to differentiate that. And I will use terminology that I think PF2e players will understand rather than sticking rigorously to Pathfinder Quest. Okay, the first term is Rules-lite. This is the entire rulebook, including character creation rules and leveling rules. All of the edge cases, such as movement, the funky dice, how the enemies work, all of that is contained in here. You can even get started without having read the book, which is what the book recommends and which is what we did. We jumped into the adventure, and the adventure itself provides a tutorialized first level, which describes the rules as needed. So you don't even have to go through this. This is just all the reference you may need, especially when leveling up. The next term I used was structure heavy, which in some TTRPG spaces is also called procedure heavy. All TTRPGs have some structure, but the amount and enforcement varies. Some OSR games like Cairn have some light abstract procedures. In the middle, we have games like D&D and PF2e, which have low structure outside of combat, and then a highly structured combat play pattern. And then on the far end, you have games like Cloudbreaker Alliance, Blades in the Dark, and Pathfinder Quest, where the mission structure or the heist structure is fairly well set, which allows for everyone's expectations to be clearly aligned. So Pathfinder Quest works under a timed adventure structure, where even exploration encounters, which can be just as varied as in any other fantasy TTRPG, have a shared time cost that they follow, kind of like Blades in the Dark's clocks. This one global adventure timer creates a fun tension in the non-combat phases between exploring everything and spending time to heal up to full, versus like the clock ticking down, which may cost you something later on in the adventure. The reason I'm talking about this is because the structure-heavy aspect of the game might be the one that makes most people likely to dismiss this as just a board game. But I want to give examples of other TTRPGs that are also procedure heavy. It's a whole category. All right, the next term is zone-based. Zone-based just means that the combat area is typically divided up into a couple of broad sections on the map, instead of using a high-resolution square grid. Now, I love zone-based combat for lighter experiences. They share the non-ambiguity of grids, which is missing in games that use ranges like Daggerheart. Ranges are ambiguous and often require GM adjudication, while zones are unambiguous. You're either in the zone or not. Zones are also the most theater of the mind friendly if you still want to have distances, because the GM can just state everyone's positioning once and everyone knows where they are, whereas with zones, you generally want to describe everyone with respect to everyone else, which means at the start of every player's turn, you may want to list out where all the other enemies are. This is just a very strong personal design preference of mine, and let me try and explain this with an example. So let's say I tell you that a corridor has 3 zones connected linearly: north, middle, and south. The wizard and rogue are in the north zone, the fighter and the ooze are in the middle zone, and the skeleton archer is in the south zone. Now you can picture where everyone is. But compare this to using ranges. To fully unambiguate ranges, the GM will have to define where each character is with respect to each other character. The skeleton archer is far from the rogue and wizard, near the fighter, and close to the ooze. But then the rogue asks, okay, but am I near the ooze or far? This is less of an issue when you have a map and you're not running Theater of the Mind, but it's still somewhat of an issue because even on a map, there may be ambiguous range placements that require GM input and slow the game down, especially in a game like Daggerheart, which tries to distinguish between melee, very close, and close. Zones are just the superior option. The next term I use to describe the game is Quickstart. And the game uses 2 techniques to make this very easy to jump into. As I said earlier, it took us 15 minutes to jump into the game, even though we did not know the character creation rules when we started playing. The way the game does this is by the card-based form factor and by limiting the number of options available, especially when compared to Pathfinder 2nd Edition, but maybe not so much when compared to other games. At first, it gives you a choice of background that comes with its own pre-selected ancestry. So for example, you could be a Tengu merchant or a halfling pickpocket. This may be the most extensive selection because there are a total of 24 options here. And the way we played it was in draft mode. We just passed the deck along to someone to then look through the cards, select one, and pass it on. And I think, again, that card form factor really helped in speed it up. Now, when it comes to classes, there are only 6. The Wizard, Oracle, Cleric, Ranger, Rogue, and Fighter. When you select a class, you get one of these class cards that comes with all of the stats pre-filled, including the skills. Now let's say you do select Ranger. You do still get some options within what kind of Ranger you want to be, but again, very limited. So at level 1, you get to choose between being a Flurry Ranger or a Precision Ranger, and you get to choose between having the Monster Hunter feat and the Skilled Improviser feat. If all of that is still too much choice for you, then the game does still come with its iconic characters, where you just pick one of the 6 iconics and you get all of that character's class, background, and ancestry. This, as you can imagine, will be the biggest reason why a PF2e player or GM will not want to switch their main campaign over to Pathfinder Quest, because by making everything more streamlined, there is a significant loss in mechanical texture. But this is also the reason why I will be using Pathfinder Quest in a TTRPG format to introduce some extended family of mine to TTRPGs. Even when including games like Cairn, Wander Home, or Quest RPG, a different RPG, I find that character creation is faster in this game because of the form factor. All right, the next three terms are fantasy, tactical, and cinematic. And because we share these terms as a description with Drawsteel, I need to proceed with care. Fantasy here just means elves, orcs, halflings, wizards, rangers. No gunslingers, no techromancers, no psionics. The game, so far, is standard fantasy fare. Tactical. Here's where it gets interesting. Pathfinder Quest has fewer mechanics and moving pieces than PF2e or Drawsteel, and so my natural instinct is to say that it cannot be as tactical as those games. But, unlike those games, Pathfinder Quest is a perfect information game, at least in the GM-less mode. The players know exactly which numbers they need to roll to hit the enemies, and they know exactly how the enemies will behave because enemy play pattern works in a formulaic way given all of the enemy abilities. And this, in some ways, is more tactically engaging, at least in a cooperative sense of doing tactics together, than other games in which the variance between turns may be so high and you don't know what the enemy might do that you can't really be sure to plan out your terms. In fact, as an aside, this may be the only TTRPG that can facilitate a satisfactory experience of playing a snare crafter. That option doesn't exist in the game yet, but because you can predict the way that the enemies will move, and because combat uses zones instead of grids, so you don't have to place your snare in exactly the perfect square, this game might finally be the one that fulfills my fantasy of playing a snare crafter, if I can make up a snare crafter class and convince someone else to run this game. Ever since playing Dragon Age Origins, it's been a disappointment to me that basically no other CRPG has fulfilled that fantasy of setting traps and then luring your enemies towards it. But this game, because of its predictability, because of its unique take on tactics, might just be the one. Now, there is still variance in the game because the dice rolls are still random, and the game does maintain a lot of uncertainty in non-combat mode, where you may know the target number you have to roll, but you don't know what the outcome of rolling that number or other numbers will be. So it does keep some things interesting while creating very interesting cooperative play experience, to the point where I can't say that the experience was less tactical than other games. It was differently tactical with a lower cognitive load. This doesn't mean I'm going to give up on my 50 spell sorcerer in PF2e and all of the options that has. But for a lighter experience, this to me just works. And then finally we have the term cinematic. Now, Drawsteel posits that cinematic means you have a cool sounding name that helps you visualize the action that's going to happen, and that you have a lot of forced movement. Pathfinder Quest keeps the same kind of naming as PF2e has, but it does add flavor text to each card to let you imagine how that move feels more clearly. And while it does not have Drawsteel's crashing into walls options, it does have a lot more forced movement starting at level 1 itself than PF2e. But I posit that cinematic means something unexpected. A cool way to use the environment, for example. And in that sense, Pathfinder Quest delivers splendidly. Baked into the game is the concept of combat challenges, and every combat has these optional challenges that in some cases increase the difficulty, but in most cases provide fun ways for players to interact with the environment. For example, a bookshelf that can be slammed down onto the zombies, or a spiky branch sticking out of a dead tree that the wizard could hydraulic push an enemy onto, skewering them. Now sure, many TTRPGs allow for this, and in fact my PF2e GM, Tegan, makes sure to include some of these pieces in every single combat. But Pathfinder Quest bakes it in as kind of a non-optional mechanic and showcases it with every single combat that it runs. And so the tactical, cinematic, and fantasy aspects, when we compare it to something like Draw Steel, we can see that there are different weightages. It is more standard fantasy than Draw Steel. It is differently tactical with fewer options and fewer mechanics, but more perfect information than Draw Steel. And it is cinematic by shifting the focus just a bit more on unique environmental interactions. So that's the essential characterization of it. But I claim that it is better than just being Rules-lite PF2e. So what's the better part? The classes, the skills, the ancestries, abilities, they're all just like simplified version of the main game. So what is better? Well, for one thing, the adventure clock, which creates this tension in the non-combat scenarios. For another, the baked-in combat challenges that create cinematic environmental interactions. The third thing is the perfect information, knowing what targets you need to hit and how the enemies will play. But the fourth thing, which I haven't mentioned yet, are the dice. I mean, come on. Who doesn't want a skull on their d6? But that is something we will get into in the next video. For now, this is me signing off, wishing you all engaging games.